G'day, this is Chris Savage from RL Ministries in Australia, welcoming you to this session of the book of Isaiah. This is a study that has been taken from Dr. Alan Fruchtenbaum's commentary on the book of Isaiah. Dr. Fruchtenbaum is the founder of RL Ministries. Thank you for coming along. So thank you for coming along to session 17. We are just a quick recap of the last time we met. As chapter 3 progresses, it's dealing with the devastation that is worldwide rather than the local devastation against Israel, because this is now the Antichrist stuff we're dealing with. The one being addressed in here in chapter 33 is the one who destroys without being destroyed, and the one who deals treacherously. Who's that? Others have not dealt treacherously with him. This is the guy, the Antichrist. He's the destroyer because he's responsible for destroying 2/3 of the worldwide Jewish population at this period of time, in the end of the tribulation. And we see this in Zechariah 13, verses 8 to 9. Now, the time has now come for the Antichrist to be destroyed, and he'll be the initial casualty of the second coming. Now, we see also that in chapter 33, early verses, we see the prayer of the remnant, because they're going through this difficult time, and the Jewish believers are relying on God to be their protection and their strength and their salvation in their time of distress. And in answer to the remnant's prayer, God promises the dispersion of the invading armies, which will occur at the time of the second coming. Now, the invading armies themselves, even though they are coming down to take the spoil from the Jews, they actually will become the spoil themselves. And so the results of the invasion into Israel and then down into Bosra, where the Jews are hiding, we have 5 results of the invasion. First up, there's the weeping of the nation. Well, why are they weeping? Well, they'll realize that they were responsible for negotiating this covenant with the Antichrist. Remember, they didn't realize he was the Antichrist until after, and had failed to negotiate peace because now the covenant has been broken. That's the first thing. They're weeping because of that. They made a mistake. Second result, traveling along the highway becomes unsafe. Why? Which is why no one's traveling on the roads. Why? Because they're being hunted down. Third, the 7-year covenant between Israel and the Antichrist is now broken. Fourth, the destruction of the cities takes place because the Antichrist armies are down there trying to wipe all the Jews out. And then the fifth thing is the desolation of the land of Israel takes place. All this is because of the Antichrist and the armies. And then we see the destruction of the invaders, and God says, "Now I'll arise," says Jehovah. And so we see that just as a breath of fire applied to stubble destroys it, so now the enemies of Israel will also burn. And the burning of Israel's enemies will lead to total destruction. And just as thorns burn up quickly in a fire, so this destruction will come suddenly and swiftly. Now, up to now, he has described the state of the nation at the time of the invasion. Now, coming into verses 13 to 16, which we're going to look at right now, he describes the state of the people at the time of the invasion. What's going on with the people? Here we go. Now, Isaiah makes a distinction here between apostates and non-apostates, between the remnant and the non-remnant. Remember that the remnant are those who are believers in Messiah, right? This segment is divided into 2 sections now. We see the insecurity of the apostates in verses 13 to 14. Let me read those 2 verses for you. "Hear ye that are far off what I have done, and you that are near, acknowledge my might. The sinners in Zion are afraid. Trembling has seized the godless ones. Who among us can dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us can dwell with everlasting burnings?" Wrong glasses. Okay? Okay. So here we have in verse 13, there's a call to repentance in light of the coming judgment. "Hear ye that are far off." In light of the coming judgment, the sinners in Zion, the non-remnant, are afraid. We see in verse 14. They're afraid because the judgment is inescapable. Now, the question in this verse is, who is capable among us of surviving the period of the devouring fire? Now, many of the tribulation judgments are judgments by fire. And by means of these judgments of fire, well over 3/4 of the world's population will be killed off in the course of the tribulation. 3/4 of the world's population will be gone. In particular, among Israel, the Jewish people, who can survive the period of the tribulation. The apostates cannot. The apostates will not survive. And the many of Daniel 9:27 that enter into the covenant with the Antichrist will indeed not survive. But we have the security of the remnant. In this verses 15 and 16 says, he that walks righteously and speaks uprightly, he that despises the gain of oppressions, that shakes his hands from taking a bribe, that stops his ears from hearing of blood, and shuts his eyes from looking upon evil, he shall dwell on high. His place of defence shall be the munition of rocks. His bread shall be given him. His waters shall be sure. Okay, so here we have in verses 15 to 16, we have the characteristics of those who are going to survive the tribulation judgments. We're talking about the Jews here, all right? The means of security, the means by which the faithful remnant of the tribulation will survive in spite of the burnings of the tribulation, is by living in accordance with these 6 characteristics listed in verse 15. These 6 characteristics are essentially living in accordance with the Mosaic law. Now, the 6 characteristics of verse 15 are these. First up, they're going to walk in righteousness and speak truthfully. They'll not defraud, they'll not take bribes or conspire to commit murder, nor will they meditate on evil. So the faithful remnant will be able to live and act spiritually because they believe in the messianic stone, Yeshua, and they have undergone regeneration. While verse 15 tells us the characteristics of the ones who survived the tribulation of Israel, the opposite characteristics will be true for unbelievers during the tribulation. And the passage for this is found in Micah chapter 7 verses 1 to 4. Micah chapter 7 verses 1 to 4. In addition, Micah emphasizes the opposite. Now, he first described the state of the nation at the time of the invasion, and then the state of the people at the time of the invasion. The state of the people is that the sinners are afraid, but the remnant itself is living securely. Now, the place of security is given in verse 16 here. He shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks. His bread shall be given him. His waters shall be sure. So the place of the Jewish remnant security is given several characteristics here. First of all, it says he'll be dwelling in places on high. So this means it's going to be a mountainous region. Now, Jesus in Matthew 24:15 to 16 makes the same point. The remnant will flee to the mountains. Second, his place of security will be the munitions of rocks. Yeah, meaning it's going to be in the wilderness. That is consistent with Revelation 12 verse 6 and verses 13 to 14, where the remnant flees to the wilderness. As we're going to see later on, the place of security for the remnant will be Bozrah, or Greek term Petra. All right, we know it more today as Petra. Bozrah or Petra, 2 names for the same city, is located today in modern-day Jordan. The ancient city of Bozrah was located in the region of Mount Seir. Mount Seir is a very rocky range of mountains to the east of Israel. Now, this fulfills the requirement of the Matthew passage. It is located in the wilderness section of ancient Edom, and so fulfills the requirement of the Revelation passage. Third thing we see here is that his bread will be given him and his water will be sure. Just as God provided for the Jews in the wilderness under Moses, so God will also provide for the Jews who flee from the Antichrist as well. Now, later on when we get to Isaiah 65, 13 to 15, points out that God will miraculously provide food and water for them because they'll not take the mark of the beast, right? Remember that mark? Well, no. Revelation tells us those who own the Antichrist as God takes a mark, and that mark is the number 666. Now, these guys that are believing remnant will not take the mark. So therefore, they'll have no legal right to buy or sell anything, so God will miraculously provide for them. Now, this is the remnant that is saved as a nation just before the second coming. And the reason that they survive is because of these characteristics of righteousness. Excuse me. Now, in the course of the Great Tribulation, there are four different groups of Jews. First of all, the largest group is the apostate Jews, right? This is the many of Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, who make the covenant with the Antichrist. However, this does not mean that they actually accept the Antichrist as their Messiah. Nowhere does the scripture say that. Nowhere does the Bible ever say that Israel accepts the Antichrist as the Messiah. Nevertheless, they do enter into a covenantal relationship with him for the purpose of security. So that's the first group. Second group of Jews is 144,000 who are the evangelists of the period of the tribulation. The third group is other Hebrew believers who became believers under the preaching of the 144,000 but are not part of that number. However, the group we're concerned with here is the next group. The fourth group is the faithful remnant, who will comprise approximately 1/3 of the world's Jewish population. So the second, third, and fourth groups actually comprise the 1/3 remaining. There'll be a group of Jews that will go through the tribulation, unbelievers as far as Christ is concerned, and also unbelievers as far as the Antichrist is concerned. And they will reject having anything to do with the covenant with the Antichrist. And in the passages of Isaiah here, and especially in chapter 40 onward, when he describes the faithful remnant in the course of the tribulation, he points out that they lived up to the light that they had. All right, that's why they didn't do murder and all those sorts of things. Now, we're going to see in verses 17 to 19 the state of the people at the time of the restoration. Isaiah writes here, "Your eyes shall see the king in his beauty. They shall behold a land that reaches afar. Your heart shall muse on the terror. Where is he that counted? Where is he that weighed the tribute? Where is he that counted the towers? You shall not see the fierce people, a people of a deep speech that you cannot comprehend, of a strange tongue that you cannot understand." Okay, now, excuse a sec. After discussing the state of the nation and of the people at the time of the invasion, Isaiah next dealt with their state at the time of restoration. In verse 17, it's these people who will survive the tribulation, and they'll see two things. First of all, they're going to see the king in his beauty, King Messiah, King Jesus. And they're going to see a land that reaches afar. That means the land in its extended state. This will be the first time that Israel will see all the promised land. For the first time, Israel will receive all of the land that was promised to the patriarchs, and this is what the surviving remnant are going to see. However, in verses 18 to 19, the one thing they'll not see is the enemy. The one who camps and raises tribute will be gone. The one who weighs silver and gold for tribute will be gone. The one who counts towers and plans for the besiegement of a city will be gone. The fierce people will be gone. Notice also that the strange tongue that they cannot understand will also be gone. All foreign tongues of invaders, all Gentile languages that invaded the land will all disappear. And you can hearken back to Isaiah 28, 11 to 13 to see about this. Now, Having described the state of the Jewish people at the time of restoration, Isaiah now deals with the state of the nation in verses 20 to 24. And in this passage, he distinguished between Jerusalem and the government and dealt with the state of each individually. So we're going to see first up is the state of Jerusalem in verses 20 to 21. Look upon Zion, the city of our solemnities. Your eyes shall see Jerusalem, a quiet habitation, a tent that shall not be removed. The stakes whereof shall never be plucked up, neither shall any of the cords thereof be broken. But there Jehovah will be with us in majesty, a place of broad rivers and streams, wherein shall go no galley with oars, neither shall gallant ships pass thereby. Isaiah makes several points in these verses. First up, it's going to be a place of solemnity. What does that mean? This means that it will be a place of solemn festivals, which we see in verse 20. Second, it's going to be a place characterized by quietness. Sometimes Jerusalem is extremely noisy today with Jews yelling at one another. However, it will become a place characterized as a quiet place during the restoration. Third, it's going to be characterized by confidence. All of this we see in verse 20. Verse 21, but there Jehovah will be with us in majesty, a place of broad rivers and streams, wherein shall go no galley with oars, neither shall gallant ships pass by. Okay, so the fourth thing we see here is it's going to be Jehovah's own abode. And that's going to be in the person of the Messianic King. For there Jehovah will be with us in majesty. Fifth thing we see also, he also mentions rivers and ships. Now, what's so unusual about this? Well, right in the center of the country, you have a mountain, which becomes the highest mountain in the world with an 85 square kilometer plateau, or 50-mile square plateau if you're Northern Hemisphere. Jerusalem currently sits on top of a mountain about 750 meters or 2,500 feet above sea level. There are no ships in Jerusalem today. So how can this be fulfilled? Well, we don't know, except that Ezekiel 40 to 48 describes an extensive change of geography and topography in the land. There will be an enormous river that begins at the temple going down to Jerusalem, where it will split into an east-west branch and an east and a west branch, one flowing toward the Mediterranean Sea and the other towards the Dead Sea. So in the Messianic kingdom, Jerusalem is going to be characterized by rivers. And we see this in Ezekiel 47, 1 to 12 and Zechariah 14, verse 8. This will allow for ships in Jerusalem, none of which will be warships. Now the state of the government we see in verses 22 to 24. For Jehovah is our judge, Jehovah is our lawgiver, Jehovah is our king, he will save us. So we'll just read this one. Let's do this verse to start with. The reign of the king is given in verse 22. Back in chapter 32, verse 1, we're told that the king would one day reign in justice and righteousness. Now, this reign is seen as to come to pass. So this is looking to the future. Jehovah is judge, so there will be justice. Jehovah is a lawgiver, so there will be righteousness. Jehovah is king, and therefore he will reign in righteousness and justice. In addition, the result is that Israel will be saved both physically and spiritually. Now, in retrospect, while Israel is saved in the kingdom, the enemy has been destroyed, because we see this in verse 23. Your tackling are loosed. They could not strengthen the foot of their mast. They could not spread the sail. Then was the prey of a great spoil divided. The lame took the prey. All right. The enemy's purpose was a failure. Rather than attaining spoil, the enemy actually becomes a spoil. Even the lame of Israel, the weak ones, were able to overcome them. In contrast to the enemy being destroyed, Israel is dwelling securely in verse 24. And the inhabitant shall not say, I am sick. The people that dwell therein shall be forgiven their iniquity. So the people dwelling in Israel will experience no spiritual sickness, because their sins are all forgiven. They're all regenerated and restored. Now moving on to chapter 34, verses 1 to 17, we're now going to look at the Jehovah's indignation against all the nations. Chapter 34 describes God's indignation against all these nations of the earth. First up, we see the destruction of these nations in verses 1 to 4, and we're also provided information regarding the place of this destruction, and it then names the cause of the calamity in verse 8, and then before detailing the results in Edom in verses 9 to 15, and then the chapter ends with an affirmation in verses 16 to 17. We're going to look through these. Okay, first up, the destruction of all the nations in verses 1 to 4. Come near, ye nations, to hear, and hearken, ye peoples. Let the earth hear and the fullness thereof, the world and all things that come forth from it. For Jehovah has indignation against all the nations and wrath against all their host. He has utterly destroyed them. He has delivered them to the slaughter. Verse 3. Their slain also shall be cast out, and the stench of their dead bodies shall come up. And the mountains shall be melted with their blood, and all the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll, and all their hosts shall fade away, as the leaf fades off the vine, and as a fading leaf from the fig tree. Okay, now notice in these verses here that the universality of what is happening suddenly becomes localized for reasons we're going to see later. But there is a universal call in verse 1 to all nations of the entire earth. Come near, ye nations, let the earth hear. Hebrew term for earth here is eretz, which refers to the earth in general, while the term for world, which is tevel, means the inhabited world. So the emphasis of the combined terms here is on the humanity of the earth having gathered together. All nations or peoples, in fact the entire world that gathered together, are to listen up, because God's going to say something. Now, the reason for the universal call against all these nations gathered together is that Jehovah has indignation against all of them, wrath against their entire host, and the sword of the Lord will strike against all the nations that are gathered together. Jehovah's indignation and wrath are directed against the entire world, and especially against their armies. The second part of verse 2 to the end of verse 4 describes the results of God's judgment against all the nations. First, we see his judgment upon the armies, which is described in second part of verse 2 to verse 3. The emphasis here is upon the totality of the destruction. It says he has utterly destroyed them. Why? Because they are devoted for destruction. Hebrew word here is kerem. As we go through our studies, kerem is a special Hebrew word meaning that they are untouchable because it is for the purpose of destruction. These armies have been set aside specifically for the purpose of destruction. They come underneath the kerem curse. When God declared it kerem, it was untouchable. And if any person attempted to save any part of it, they also would be caught up in the judgment. Now, back in Joshua chapter 6, verses 17 to 19. Joshua 6, 17 to 19. Jericho was declared kerem, and everything in it was devoted to destruction and untouchable. Now, when a man called Achan touched the spoil of a Babylonian garment for himself, the result was his death and the death of his entire family. And you can see that in Joshua chapter 7, verses 20 to 21. So the kerem judgment is a very severe judgment, and you don't play around with it. It's a very serious issue. Now, all of these nations that have been gathered together, and this is the Armageddon campaign, the Armageddon gathering here, are now under God's kerem judgment, and they are devoted for destruction. The picture here is one of wholesale destruction with bodies strewn everywhere. The smell is that of decomposing bodies. There will be a massive amount of blood. The blood will run like water, and the mountains will be melted or eroded with the blood. And this is a picture of we find in Revelation 14, verses 19 to 20. I think it's actually verses 16 to 20. But anyway, Revelation 14, 16 to 20. The amount of blood we see in Revelation 14 is so massive that it reaches the horses' necks. That's how much blood there is. Now we see second in verse 4, we see along with the destruction of the armies, verse 4, all the host of heaven shall be dissolved. The heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll, and all their hosts shall fade away as a leaf fades from off the vine, and as a fading leaf from the fig tree. So second thing we see here in verse 4, along with the destruction of the armies, there are also convulsions of the heavens, because sin has also polluted the heavens, according to Job 15, verse 15, Job 15, and Hebrews 9:23. See that there on your screen. In Revelation 14, 19 to 20 refers to this verse as part of God's judgment that will create a whole mass of convulsions in the atmospheric heavens. So far in these 4 verses, Isaiah said that God has indignation against all nations gathered together, and God is going to strike against all the nations and all the armies of these nations. Now, it does not mean that every individual is destroyed, but the armies of the nations are destroyed and all their hosts. It's the armies that are destroyed, not every nation, right? Let's excuse me again. Okay. Oh, yeah. Good wife's checking up on me. So, yeah. So far, Isaiah declared that God's indignation and wrath will be directed against all the nations that are gathered together. He also pointed out here that God's sword is going to strike all these nations and destroy all their armies. The focus of the verses was on the totality of the destruction. Now we're going to see the specific nation where the sword of God is going to strike against all the armies of the world. It is the nation of Edom. Right? This is the place of the destruction of all the nations, is Edom. We see this in verses 5 to 7. For my sword has drunk its fill in heaven. Behold, it shall come down upon Edom and upon the people of my curse to judgment. The sword of Jehovah is filled with blood. It is made fat with fatness, with the blood of lambs and goats, with the fat of the kidneys of rams. For Jehovah has a sacrifice in Bozrah, and a great slaughter in the land of Edom. And the wild oxen shall come down with them, and the bullocks with the bulls, and their land shall be drunken with blood, and their dust made fat with fatness. Edom today is modern day southern Jordan. Now these armies will be gathered in Edom, and so the sword of God will strike against all these armies in the land of Edom. For Edom itself, they too are the people of God's curse. In addition, they are also people who are devoted for destruction, according to the book of Obadiah, verses 17 to 21. Obadiah 17 to 21. Now, Ammon and Moab, which are all Ammon, Moab, and Edom, are all southern Jordan. Ammon and Moab, they do have a surviving remnant that will populate the millennium. Edom will have no surviving remnant. They are totally kiram. They're bound for destruction. The slaughter of the nations here is viewed in the first part of verse 6 as a colossal sacrifice. The sword of Jehovah is filled with blood. However, this is not the only place this is found. It's also found in Jeremiah 46 verse 10, Jeremiah 46:10, Ezekiel 39, 17 to 20, and Zephaniah chapter 1 verses 7 to 8. Revelation 19, 17 to 18 also view the massive slaughter of the armies here are gathered together as a tremendous sacrifice prepared by God. So this all the slaughter is simply a sacrifice. Now, while the nation has been pinpointed as southern Jordan or Edom, he now pinpoints it even further in the second part of verse 6. Verse 6 now pinpoints the location to a specific city. It is the city of Bozrah, or by its Greek name, Petra. All the armies of the earth are gathered together specifically around Bozrah because Micah chapter 2 verse 12 tells us that the Jewish remnant is hiding in the city of Bozrah. And the purpose of this conflict, which we commonly call, like Armageddon or the campaign of Armageddon, the reason that the armies of the Antichrist gather is for the destruction of the Jewish people once and for all. Since the major body of Israel is in the land of Bozrah or Petra, that is where the nations or the vultures, which we see in Matthew 24 verse 28, Matthew 24, 28, this is where the vultures gather. The nations, the armies of the Antichrist gather here for the purpose of annihilating the Jews. Now, Jeremiah chapter 49 verses 13 to 14 also points out that when the nations of the earth gather, they will gather in the environs of Bozrah or Petra. Also, it is in those environs that the armies of the nations will be slaughtered around Bozrah or Petra. It will be the slaughter of a great sacrifice of verses 6 to 7. And the wild oxen shall come down with them, and the bullocks with the bulls, and their land shall be drunken with blood, and their dust made fat with fatness. It's going to be a slaughter of a great sacrifice. This is a sacrifice greater than any that has ever been offered any time in the world. God gives us a name for this final conflict. Unfortunately, no one uses this term. Revelation 16 verse 14 gives a proper name for this conflict. It is the war of the great day of God the Almighty. That is the biblical name for this conflict. The Bible does not place the final conflict in Armageddon. Remember, Armageddon is simply a traditional name that is used, right? The plain of Jezreel is a great valley in Israel, and the Bible refers to the Mount of Megiddo as Har Megiddo, and we refer to this as Armageddon, right? Traditionally, Christians have called the entire valley Armageddon. Technically, that's not right there. That's incorrect. The Jezreel Valley is simply the gathering ground for the armies of the Antichrist. They gather together there to head on down to Jerusalem. They'll then move south against Jerusalem and take the city. And then they're going to move further south against Bozrah or Petra. But Christ returns to Bozrah. Isaiah 63, we haven't got to it yet, but I'm just telling you about it now, a bit of a precursor here. Isaiah 63 is a parallel passage to Isaiah 34. Because in Isaiah 63, Isaiah the prophet is standing upon a high point. He's looking across to the east toward the land of Edom. Right? And looking in that direction, he sees a graphic figure approaching him. A question and answer session ensues between Isaiah and this figure approaching. The first question is in Isaiah 63 verse 1. Isaiah is asking here, who is this that comes from Edom with dyed garments from Bozrah? This that is glorious in his apparel, marching in the greatness of his strength. And the answer comes back. The answer is, I that speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Only one person can make this statement, and that is the Messianic King. He's the one who speaks in righteousness, and he is mighty to save. He's the one dressed up in glorious apparel, marching in the greatness of his strength. Notice the countries from which he's coming. He's coming from Edom. The city that he comes from in that country is Bozrah. The initial place of the second coming is Bozrah or Petra, not the Mount of Olives. In the second question, notice, Isaiah noticed here, Isaiah noticed his blood-stained garments in verse 2. Wherefore are you red in your apparel, and your garments like him that treads in the wine vat? Verse 3 says, this is him answering. He says, I trod them in mine anger and trampled them in my wrath, and their lifeblood is sprinkled upon my garments, and I have stained all my raiment. For the day of vengeance was in my heart, and the year of my redeemed is come. That's the Messiah dispensing with the armies of the Antichrist. Now, verse 8 explains the cause of the monumental destruction that's going to take place in the tribulation. For Jehovah has a day of vengeance, a year of recompense for the cause of Zion. A year of recompense and a day of vengeance. Both of these in Hebrew are in the plural form, showing a plural of intensity. Because of Edom's sins against Israel, Jehovah will have a day of vengeance. All the indignities against Israel will now be avenged. For Israel's vengeance, all the nations are to be destroyed, and especially for Israel's recompense, the land of Edom is about to become a continual burning wasteland throughout the 1,000 years of Messiah's reign on the earth. This will be a time of recompense or retribution, especially for the grievance of Zion. Now, remember, as I said before, right, when we talk about everybody being killed, it's the armies, okay? Not all the nations, it's the armies of the nations. Okay, moving on. What are the results in verses 9 to 15? Back in chapters 13 to 14, we already pointed out, that throughout the millennial kingdom, Babylon will become a burning wasteland, and that is where the demons will abide. Now, same thing will hold true of the area of the land of Edom, or modern-day southern Jordan. It's going to be a place of perpetual burning desolation. Verse 9 and 10. Let's look at verses 9 to 12 here. And the streams of Edom shall be turned into pitch, and the dust thereof into brimstone, and the land thereof shall become burning pitch. It shall not be quenched night nor day. The smoke thereof shall go up forever. From generation to generation it shall lie waste. None shall pass through it forever and ever. Verse 11. But the pelican and the porcupine shall possess it, and the owl and the raven shall dwell therein, and he will stretch over it the line of confusion and the plummet of emptiness. Verse 12. They shall call the nobles thereof to the kingdom, but none shall be there, and all its princes shall be nothing. Let's just leave it off there, all right? We'll just look at these 9 to 12 first. Okay. In verses 9 to 10, point out the fact of perpetual desolation. Verse 9 describes the condition of the land, while verse 10 tells us how long it's going to last. The word translated forever, it's the word olam, O-L-A-M, olam in Hebrew, found in verse 10, simply means up to the end of an age or to the end of a dispensation. In this case, the burning will continue until the end of the dispensation of the kingdom, Messianic kingdom. Throughout the Messianic kingdom, the land of Edom, like the land of Babylon, will be nothing but a burning wasteland. The smoke will rise up and go throughout the whole kingdom. It will have no human inhabitant. Says the pelican and the porcupine shall possess it. Right? Verse 11 lists the number of animals that will dwell in Edom. The pelican, the porcupine, the owl, and the raven. Now, so what it would appear to be here is a number of animals will live there. In addition, what these animals that are listed are here depends upon your translation, all right? We don't actually know which animals he's talking about here. Most of these translations are guesswork, such as the pelican and the porcupine, the owl and the raven. These are the animals that I have in the American Standard Version 1901. Your translation may list different types of animals. ESV, English Standard Version, has hawk instead of pelican. King James Version has cormorant. So it's a bird type thing. Okay, no one knows exactly what kind of animals these are, but apparently there are animals that can live in this kind of environment. However, as we look at the world and the animals in general, Virtually no animals can survive in a burning wasteland described here. It would be an impossibility. These creatures must be something other than literal animals, and what they really are, we're going to see in verses 13 to 15. The divine judgment itself is through the end of verse 11. It becomes a line of confusion and a plummet of emptiness. And now these are the same words used in the Hebrew text as in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. Tohu vavohu. Tohu vavohu. Wherever these words are found, they're used in the sense of judgment. Therefore, Genesis 1:2 may be a result of judgment, specifically the judgment of Satan. Now, in verse 12, there is a disappearance of Edomite royalty. Nobody's left. Unlike other countries of that specific day, Edom had an elected monarchy. Every time the king died, the nobles gathered together to elect a new king. Just like whenever the Pope dies, we have the College of the Cardinals to gather together, elect a new Pope. We saw that just recently. Now the nobles have disappeared. They're all gone. Nobody's left. And so has the elected monarchy of the Edomites. Why? Because there's nobody left. And thorns shall come up in its palaces, nettles and thistles in the fortresses thereof, and it shall be a habitation of jackals, a court for ostriches, and the wild beasts of the desert shall meet with the wolves, and the wild goat shall cry to his fellow. Yea, the night monster shall settle there, and shall find her a place of rest. Verse 15, there shall the dart snake make her nest, and lay and hatch and gather under her shade. Yea, there shall the kites be gathered, and every one with her mate. Okay, now, verses 13 to 15 describe the royal palace. The royal palace becomes a place of thorns and thistles. All right, inhabitants are ostriches, jackals, wild goats, night creatures. Now, we're not certain what type of creatures they are. However, they must be creatures that can survive in a burning wasteland that has been described here. Nevertheless, what they really are is seen at the end of verse 14. And the wild goat shall cry to his fellow, yea, the night monster shall settle there, and shall find her a place of rest. Okay. Hebrew word for wild goats is se'er. Se'er. It is the same word used to describe the wild goats that will inhabit Babylon for the entire millennial kingdom. Again, since literal goats would not survive in a land of burning brimstone and pitch, these are demons in goat form. Other scriptures, such as the book of Revelation, also compare certain types of demons to specific animals. Demons can survive in a burning wasteland. Both Edom and Babylon will become the abode for demons for the entire millennial kingdom. The translation that I have reads night monster, while other translations might have something else. Hebrew term for night monster is Lilith, right? Lilith, referring to night demons. The word itself simply means nightiness, or perhaps night-like. Now, what is the symbol of the church of Satan? It's the goat's head. Now, that is not by accident. Rabbinic theology recognizes the demonic elements in verses 13 to 15, especially the Lilith of verse 14 has received a lot of attention by the rabbis. Some of them consider her the mother of the demons. So the Hebrew term became the name Lilith, or Lilith. In rabbinic writings, Lilith usually appears as a demon that preys on women in childbirth and young children. In medieval texts, she is popularized as Adam's first wife who refused to submit to him and was therefore replaced by Eve. Remember, this is rabbinic Judaism, not biblical. All right? The final result of Edom's destruction is provided in verse 15. There shall the dart snake make her nest and lay and hatch and gather under her shade. Yea, there shall the kites be gathered, everyone with her mate. Now, in the scriptures, snakes are also associated with Satan and the demons. And we see this in Genesis 3:1, Revelation 9:19, and 12:9, and 20, verse 2. There they are on your screen. Okay. Now we see the affirmation in verses 16 to 17. Seek ye out of the book of Jehovah and read. No one of these shall be missing. none shall want her mate. For my mouth it has commanded, and in his spirit it has gathered, and his spirit, it has gathered them. And he has cast a lot for them, and his hand has divided it unto them by line. They shall possess it forever. From generation to generation shall they dwell therein. What's he saying here? Well, having described the results of Edom's destruction, Isaiah now turned to the affirmation of the prophecies. First part of verse 16 shows that every prophecy will have its fulfillment. Seek ye out of the book of Jehovah and read. No one of these shall be missing. None shall want her mate. So the book of Jehovah is the prophetic word, and the admonition is to study it. The phrase, no one of these shall be missing, is the prophecy itself. And none shall want her mate means that every prophecy will be fulfilled. In other words, Isaiah was telling the people of Israel to search the book of God and read all the prophecies that are in it, because not one of them would be lacking. Every one of them will come to pass. The guarantee for the fulfillment of the prophecies is given in the second part of verse 16. For my mouth it has commanded, and his spirit it has gathered them. So God's mouth has given the order, and his spirit will see to the prophecies fulfillment. Ooh. Point of verse 17 is that Israel's future has been carefully planned. And he has cast a lot for them, and his hand has divided it unto them by line. They shall possess it forever. From generation to generation shall they dwell therein. The terms lot and line show careful planning. Cast a lot and delivered it unto them by line. This shows careful planning. Ultimately, Israel will possess all of the promised land. Now, moving into the restoration of Israel into chapter 35. Let's give it a crack, see if we can finish it off here. The restoration of Israel is now brought out in sharp contrast to what's just happened to Edom. While Edom will be a continually burning wasteland throughout the millennial kingdom, Israel will be restored and beautified. Now we're going to see this passage in 4 sections here. We're going to see the transformation of the land in verses 1 to 2 of chapter 35. Here we go. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice even with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given unto it, the excellency of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of Jehovah, the excellency of our God. All right, these verses refer to specific areas of Israel. In verse 1, the word wilderness and the dry land has to do with the Negev desert in southern Israel. Hebrew word translated desert is Arava, so it has to do with the Arabah, which extends from the Dead Sea down to the Red Sea at a place called Eilat. Didn't write it there. Eilat. From the Dead Sea to the Red Sea at Eilat. This is part of the Rift Valley. Both the Negev and the Jordan Rift Valley are nothing but desolation today. They're dry and unproductive today, except for scattered Israeli settlements. But that's all going to change in the kingdom. It will all become productive. The word translated blossom as the rose is not the Hebrew word for rose, but rather it is a word that means it's a meadow of saffron, or it's a meadow of crocus. So it's not just the rose. It's the whole meadow of saffron. Now, saffron's pretty expensive stuff also, but it's colourful. Verse 2 tells us what the land will receive. Now, back in chapter 33, verse 9, if you go back there, you'll notice the very places mentioned here, which are Sharon, Bashan, and Carmel, are the most productive areas of Israel. But under God's judgment, they'll fail to produce during the tribulation. However, in the Messianic or millennial kingdom, that will be switched around, and Carmel, Sharon, and Bashan will become extremely productive. Moreover, they will see the glory of Lebanon, Carmel, and Sharon. Now, Lebanon's glory, meaning her trees, and especially the cedars, will once again return. Most importantly, the Shekinah glory will be visible in the land. They, the Jewish people, shall see the glory of Jehovah. That's the Shekinah glory, and the excellency of our God. What's the cause? The second coming, verses 3 to 4. Strengthen ye the weak hands and confirm the weak knees. Say to them that are of a fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, with the recompense of God. He will come and save you. In these two verses, Isaiah summarizes his message in chapter 34. God is coming in the person of the Messianic King. He will come with vengeance and with recompense. He is coming to save Israel. Particularly Isaiah 34:8 states, for Jehovah has a day of vengeance and a year of recompense for the cause of Zion, and they will see its fulfillment. The cause of Israel's transformation will be Messiah's second coming. What are the results? Verses 5 to 7. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as a hart, and the tongue of the dumb shall sing. For in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert. And the glowing sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. In the habitation of jackals where they lay shall be grass with reeds and rushes. Results are twofold here. First up, the people will be healed of all infirmities in verses 5 to 6. The blind, the deaf, the lame, and the dumb will all be healed. These things are always true when the king is present. When he was present in the first coming, these things were true. We see that in Matthew 11:4 to 6, Matthew 11:4 to 6, and Matthew 15:29 to 31. Matthew 15:29 to 31. And they will be true again. The second result concerns the land which will have an abundance of water in verses 6 to 7. Now, specific areas of Israel are mentioned. The Negev desert will break out in water. Now, the Negev is not a sandy desert that cannot produce. It has a good soil that will produce. Problem is, no water. Because of a lack of water, it has remained unproductive. Now, suddenly, throughout the Negev, water breaks out everywhere, so the Negev begins to blossom like the rose. Now, we often hear that Israel today is making the deserts blossom like the rose. However, the deserts in Israel are not yet blossoming as a rose, all right? Northern area of Israel, which is productive today, was never a desert. It was a swamp, or it was swamps, which needed to be drained. The Negev desert is still nothing but desert and is not yet producing. Nevertheless, in the kingdom, it will produce. In the Arabah, the problem is also lack of water. Again, in the kingdom, streams will break out, the ground will produce pools of water. And those mirages that people see all over the desert look like water and are merely mirages that disappear. And guess what's going to happen? Those mirages will become real, and pools of water will be all over the place. The burning sand will become a pool of pure and refreshing water, and the thirsty ground will become bubbling springs. And we see the highway of holiness in verses 8 to 10. And a highway shall be there, and a way, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it, but it shall be for the redeemed, the wayfaring men. Yea, fools shall not err therein. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast go up thereon. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. In the Messianic kingdom, verse 8, there's going to be a highway. It's going to be called the way of holiness. This highway will pass through the desert, which will be in bloom. However, you must be eligible to walk or travel on this highway. It will not be for the unclean, but only for the redeemed. The term fool here is not in the sense that we think of a fool, but in this sense it means the inexperienced. So the inexperienced, the one who is inexperienced in this walk because he has not traveled this way before, the way will be so clear that he'll not be able to make a mistake in finding it. And then verse 9 details who will not be eligible to use the way of holiness. The ineligible are the unclean, the lion, and the ravenous beast. The eligible are the wayfarer, the poor, and the inexperienced. The manner of their return is given in verse 10. And the ransomed of Jehovah shall return, and come with singing unto Zion. And everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. The phrase, the ransomed of Jehovah, this limits the returnees to the believing remnant of Israel. They will enter Zion with joyful singing. In fact, they'll be characterized by eternal delight as they have obtained gladness and exceeding joy. What they will not experience is sorrow and sighing, both of which will flee away. Verse 10 is simple. It's a simple summary of many, many prophecies of Israel's return, regathering, and restoration. And that is our lot for this session. Thank you for coming along. Study hard, grow strong.